Welcome to the Executive Innovation Show podcast, where we bring you real executive conversations with industry game changers and thought leaders. We ask the questions you're thinking, what you're scared to ask, and we make your brain hurt afterward. With your host, Carrie Chitsey Wells, co-founder and CEO of One Touch Video Chat, live video interviews, and the nonprofit Humans Helping Humans.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's podcast. Today, we're going to talk about why only 10% of people with addiction problems seek treatment. And I'm so happy to have with us an awesome guest for today. We have Brad Christensen, who's the Program Development Director at Corner Canyon Recovery. He's experienced operator and director in mental health in the addiction industry. Brad, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me here.
Awesome. Well, I want to talk a little bit first about some of the statistics, kind of depending upon where you're looking. Anywhere between 20 to 25 million Americans have a substance abuse problem, but only somewhere between 10 and 18% actually seek treatment. And there's really a lot of reasons why people don't seek treatment. Being in the industry and kind of seeing it on a daily basis, really want to understand from you, what do you think are some of the top reasons why people actually don't seek treatment?
It's a good question. I would say available resources are probably one of the highest factors for it. Being predominantly financial resources, I know there are not enough, I don't know the statistics on it specifically, but there are not enough treatment beds available for residential treatment at least. And that is not always necessary for someone that has a substance abuse issue.
Right.
But there are not enough beds currently for everyone that meets criteria for it per se. But then it comes down to financial resources as well. And that's, treatment can be fairly expensive sometimes. And there's not a lot of resources for it.
And do you think too that is there a stigma around going to an inpatient and kind of how that looks on somebody's ego or shame, or what kind of factor does that play a factor?
Absolutely. Yeah. I'd say, one of the leading causes of why people don't seek treatment, in my opinion, aside from resources, is a fear of change, a fear of not knowing what's coming, a fear of how do I live life without alcohol or heroin or cocaine or whatever it might be. And that stops people a lot because they don't know what to expect. And then you throw on top of that the stigma associated with, hey, I've got a problem. I've got to go away for, 30, 60, 90, 120 days, whatever it might be. I've got to go somewhere and get better.
Right.
Or be cured, as people tend to think is the case. You throw that on top of it and it compounds the factors and people, they get really afraid of that.
Right. And there's all different types of addiction, whether it's drugs, alcohol, whatever it may be. And with the rise in the opioid crisis, we talk about a lot, that's exposed kind of a whole slew of new drugs with more increased usage of heroin and fentanyl and things like that. Has that changed anything from kind of what you're seeing over the last few years of what is the drug from the addiction standpoint, or changed any of the requirements for detox?
Well, I would say take a detox standpoint first. If someone's going to detox, there's like a medical detox is what I presume you're referring to there.
Yeah.
With that, with insurance companies, most insurance companies won't cover a medical detox for opiates. Unless there are some other factors associated, be it an elderly population or other substances on top of the opiates. Because just a heroin detox per se, or over-the-counter, or prescription strength opiates, there's been no research to indicate that the individual will have lasting consequences or potentially death from an opioid detox. So most insurance companies won't cover just an opiate detox because it's not medically necessary. That can do that at home very uncomfortably, but it can be done in a different setting.
That's crazy.
When you look at like benzodiazepines or alcohol, the withdrawals alone from those two substances can actually kill the individual if not managed in a medical setting. So the medical criteria for it is different for both of them. When it comes to treatment outcomes and what we're seeing in treatment with the opioid crisis having more publicity surrounding it, it's kind of hard to say. Opiates are kind of becoming almost like what marijuana was before, if that makes any sense. So marijuana was kind of just the staple, if you will. I don't want to say staple, that's probably not a good way to term it, but it was very common and still is very common. Opiates are kind of becoming just a more common thing. We have people that come in with their drug of choice being an opiate-based substance. For the majority of the people that we're seeing, at least, it's just common that they do opiates when they're available, just because they're there and they're more readily accessible, kind of like marijuana was before.
And has that had any difference in length of stay for treatment? Some of the stronger opiates like, heroin or fentanyl from that perspective?
Not necessarily with length of stay. When it comes to treatment lengths of stay, there's a lot of factors that go into it. At least for us at Corner Canyon, we look more at the behaviors that the client's trying to achieve, kind of what their goals are versus how the symptoms that they're experiencing, their post-acute withdrawals, more commonly referred to as PAWS. So we look for other factors minus just what substances they came in on.
Gotcha.
So it's really kind of hard to say that, to be honest.
Okay, gotcha. You guys have a program that specializes in the LGBT community. Talking a little bit about kind of commonality and differences, the mental health side of, leading to addiction and kind of some deep-rooted issues there. Are you seeing anything different for LGBT versus non in that regard?
There are some differences, yes, I would say. There's always guilt and shame associated with substance abuse or mental health. And that's pretty standard across homosexual and heterosexual populations, or anyone in the LGBT community, I should say. But when it comes to those concerns that are more prevalent among the LGBT population, you see a lot of a desire just to be accepted. I shouldn't even say accepted, embraced for the differences, embraced for who they are. I think that's more of a common, they just want to be, everyone wants to be loved. Everyone wants to feel appreciated and included. And so for us at Corner Canyon, we want to help everyone feel included. We're looking for the similarities, not the differences. We want people to come in and feel loved, supported, understood for what's going on with them in their life at that time, and where they've been, of course, so that they can move forward in a productive, healthy society.
Right. So another thing that we talk a lot about is youth mental health and being able to really kind of break down that stigma and get youth the help that they need, whether it's counseling, therapy, things like that. And we did an infographic recently on youth mental health, and LGBT has 3 times higher suicide rate and 2 times higher with substance abuse on the youth side. When you're seeing LGBT come into your substance abuse program, is a lot of that trauma stemming from youth? And is there better outcomes, obviously, if that mental health is done in the youth versus kind of letting that fester into adult where they might seek treatment?
Yeah, to a degree, I would say there's a severity rating called it's the ACE rating. Now I can't remember what it's called. Adolescent childhood experience, or adversive childhood experiences is what it is. And in this rating system, they assess experiences for individuals under the age of 18, and the higher number of adverse childhood experiences that the individual had directly correlates with adult problems, be it mental health, substance abuse, depression, anxiety, even have a correlation with adults that end up marrying alcoholics. There's a direct correlation for the higher number of score on an ACE indicates a higher percentage of actually marrying an alcoholic spouse. So a lot of concerns come from an adolescent experiences, and those can range anywhere from not feeling supported by their family, or even feeling like their family like they could be healthy, productive member of society as an LGBT adult.
With some of that criteria that you're kind of talking about, it sounds like that regardless of LGBT or not, it's not really a determining factor, or
sorry, say that one more time.
That it's not depending upon if they're the LGBT or non-LGBT, it's really more about, the trauma or adversity that they've had as a youth that is really kind of determines that potential addiction factor.
To a degree, so it's kind of a 50-50 versus nature versus nurture when it comes to addictive patterns as an adult or even as an adolescent, addictive patterns of behavior or maladaptive coping mechanisms. So addiction has a 50% hereditary component is what the research is indicating, which then leaves 50% for, your environment that you grew up in. You might have a high propensity for addiction in your genes, be it through family experiences. But if you never pick up a substance, if you never drink or use, anything, you're not going to open up those pathways, so to speak. The likelihood of becoming addicted is not there. It's kind of hard to say, but trauma is definitely a factor in addiction, I would say. We see one of the things we do is we have a pretty significant trauma program that we help work with for our clients. I would say there's probably at least 90% of our clients experience trauma in some form throughout their life before they come to us that has an impact, generally a significant impact on the amount of substances that they were consuming.
Gotcha.
And sometimes the trauma also can come from engaging in substance use as well. So the chicken and the egg becomes a factor there.
Right. And in the traditional, we're talking about moving on to, kind of recovery and post inpatient treatment. Obviously, the relapse rates are very high, in some cases upwards of 95%. What are some of the critical components to the aftercare program and recovery? A lot of inpatient and even outpatient kind of the aftercare process, a lot of times is lacking. Some places have very extensive aftercare programs. Some places it's really up to the individual, kind of how they adapt and taking, a well person potentially back into a sick environment. What are some of the things that you guys are doing on the aftercare program, or kind of what's in the future that should be kind of best practices when talking about aftercare?
Well, aftercare needs to be specific to the individual based on their needs and what's going on. Kind of a more classic aftercare approach generally would look at going from a residential center, assuming that's where the individual is at the time, into either a day treatment or an intensive outpatient program, depending upon severity of symptoms and length of sobriety and that kind of stuff. That way, the individual is able to step down their level of treatment while also increasing the level of life experiences that's going on. So the stresses of life are increasing as treatment is decreasing, so that you're able to experience kind of life on life's terms, deal with the normative life stressors, and then be able to go back to the center for in an outpatient setting and be able to discuss what's going on and process through the triggers and experiences and how do I handle these, how do I handle these emotions that I haven't had before because I haven't encountered this experience without a substance on board. So generally speaking, you want to have a step down approach where you're just slowly decreasing treatment services so that it's not such a big hit to the system when you go directly from, say, a residential center to back home, potentially, where it might not be a healthy living environment. That's kind of a recipe for disaster in a manner of speaking.
Yeah, absolutely. And with consumers, i.e. patients, convenience being, a very high factor. And with, kind of all the new digital technologies and digital healthcare and so forth, where do you see that changing or enhancing current treatment models, over the next couple of years?
I honestly think that it's going to be a big factor in aftercare in particular. There are a lot of rural areas that don't have enough resources in them. And having the ability to meet with a counselor, a therapist, or even in a group setting. I've heard of some programs that do group settings through a Skype type system where they're able to engage in treatment services. They're able to get the support that they need. So I think I really think it's going to be a big factor coming forward. I think people will use it more and more.
Right. Well, good. Well, Brad, I want to thank you so much for being on the show. If anybody has any questions for Brad or about what we talked about today, feel free to submit those. Please remember to subscribe to the show to get your weekly episodes in the podcast app of your choice. And Brad, we look forward to really watching what you guys are doing at Corner Canyon and kind of seeing what the future has in store for you guys over the rest of 2019.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Carrie.
Thanks.
This podcast has come to a close. To hear more from the Executive Innovation Show podcast, subscribe, submit questions, and share the love. Follow us on social. We're everywhere.